We share these conversations to encourage spirit-filled ecumenical dialogue and deeper theological reflection. While our discussions partially draw from the life and teachings of the Evangelical Orthodox Church, our words are personal and are not to be understood as formal positions of the EOC. Christian faith should be embodied. So join Christ's one holy apostolic church wherever his body is found. With that established, on with the show.
So, we are recording a bit of an addendum to the Who Do You Love episode, and I'm here with Leanne Bellamy. Introduce yourself.
Introduce myself.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Leanne. My last name is Bellamy. I stole that from my husband, which was a lovely decision. I'm very happy with it. And I guess we've been a Holy Covenant since May 2025, officially, but much longer than that unofficially. So it's complicated.
And as everyone knows, my name is Aaron Monroe, and I'm a deacon at Holy Covenant. So we are going to continue and dive maybe into a slightly different topic, but that is connected to veneration and seeing God's glory through his creation. So, how has beauty... let me rephrase that. Has there been a work of literature that revealed God's glory to you in a way that theology could not?
That theology could not?
Yeah. Or didn't.
Or didn't. Yeah, I think... Yeah, I think, yes, the answer to that is yes. And there's been more than one. Those that would fall into that camp are the poems and stories. I'm thinking particularly of The Dream of the Rood, as well as C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. And when those texts deal with the reality of suffering and the possibility of the glory of God in the midst of that suffering, those texts were able to help me understand that possibility, and to participate in that possibility when I needed it in a way that I don't think theology would have been able to communicate, actually, like an abstract theology. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if that's similar to how when a person is grieving and a Christian comes up to you and says something like, God's got a plan for everything.
Yeah.
It's okay. Don't,
Yeah.
it's all going to be all right. God needed another angel in heaven or something.
Yeah. Don't worry, they're in heaven.
Yeah. It's like, it's not, that doesn't land.
No, it doesn't land because it doesn't take the reality of the tragedy seriously. Because it tries to direct your attention away and forward to a place that you're not there, I suppose.
Yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't take the reality of suffering seriously, and it doesn't show you, which I think is the particular power of literary text, or the particular capacity of literary text, is to show something that's real rather than tell you about it. And so that doesn't show you the possibility of God's glory in your experience, and it doesn't show you your responsibility to choose to cling to God's goodness and glory in the midst of your suffering. And I don't think that responsibility is something you can tell people they have or need to pick up. I think it's something you have to show them is possible and why.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there that haven't experienced sorrow or grief yet.
Yeah.
But they will. And there are always points where you you have to either choose hope or despair,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like several times in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah. For those listeners who don't know the two poem slash short stories that you referenced, can
Yeah.
you just even give us a little snippet, a little summary of what those books are about?
Yeah, absolutely. So The Dream of the Rood is a 7th-ish century Anglo-Saxon poem. So we don't know precisely when it was written. We don't know precisely who it was written by. We know that it's in England or Britain. And there's good reason to think that it had some kind of liturgical or devotional purpose. Part of the reason for that is that we have texts that are found in books that are along pilgrimage sites and things like that. And it's a poem about it's a contemplation of the cross. It's a contemplation of the suffering of the cross as it identifies with and participates in the crucifixion of Christ. And it's a poem that asks you as a disciple to enter in through the imagery and the language of the poem, to enter into that experience of suffering with the courage of a loyal disciple, and in moving through that, discover the glory of the risen Christ and your responsibility to share that with others. So that's The Dream of the Rood. And then The Great Divorce is a fantasy novel written by C.S. Lewis. By fantasy, he says explicitly in the introduction, it is an imaginative supposal.
Supposal.
Right?
I love it.
So what he's saying is, this is not supposed to be an explicit, accurate depiction of what heaven and hell look like. So don't read it that way. That's what he's saying, right? And I always say The Great Divorce is Dante light for modern people. So it is heavily influenced by Dante's Divine Comedy as well as other texts, but heavily by the Divine Comedy. But it's written in a novel format, which obviously is a genre that modern people find much more accessible than lengthy poetic dream visions, although the novel is a dream vision. And what Lewis is really looking at is the choice that we have to choose heaven or hell. And that nothing of heaven, we have a tendency to think, well, I could just hold on to some of these things that I love or that I desire that are keeping me in hell, and somehow if I can just take them into heaven with me. And he says, no, nothing of hell has a place in heaven. And so it's a series of choices, really, where the narrator and the main character of the novel, who's actually also Lewis, is watching these ghosts who have come from Greytown, which is Lewis's depiction of hell, kind of also purgatory, but we can get into that. Anyway, but watching these ghosts be presented with a choice in terms of what are they going to desire most, and are they going to desire heaven and ultimately God's kingdom, and therefore be able to continue up the holy mountain into paradise, or are they going to cling to the dispositions, predominantly dispositions, attitudes, things that they have their affections wrapped around that are not God, and therefore are dragging them down into hell. And when you ask me the question about, what has influenced you, or what has communicated to you something that perhaps a more abstract theology couldn't, there is a scene in that novel where we watch the ghost of a mother who's lost a child have to make the decision to choose love for God and the desire for God and his kingdom over what has become a very twisted love because of the grief over a child that's died. And it's a very true depiction of the way that our loves, even for the best things, in that God has given us, if we love those good gifts more than we love God and his kingdom, then they warp and twist our soul and drag us down into hell. And I know that it's true because we lost a daughter. And that text was very important in teaching me how I was going to move through healing through that experience. And I don't think an abstract theology could have done that.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how on the topic of that scene where it's almost like, is it not like angelic beings or something trying to help
The bright
each
spirits.
of the ghosts?
Yeah. The saints, basically. They've been sent to help them.
Yeah, I like that, bright spirits.
Yeah. The solid people.
Yeah, but it's crazy how you can feel it. Like when you observe those ghosts, you can feel it in yourself. For anyone who, it's a rare thing. I don't know that I've ever come across a person who doesn't have a vice or two.
Right.
And what's weird is how they can feel like they are us.
Yes.
That those vices have become so parasitical in our life that for them to be extracted would be to kind of cut off some flesh, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's probably true.
Yeah.
But
well, and I think like Lewis is picking up on this is one of the elements that he's taking from Dante. Do you remember the chapter in the book about the lizard?
Yes.
The lizard of lust.
Yeah,
right?
That's on the guy's back.
That's
I think.
right. Yeah. And he has to, the bright spirit has to ask him for permission. Can I kill it? Can I kill it? And they have this long discourse, like this back and forth about whether he's going to let him
Maybe
kill
not
it.
right now.
Right. Yeah. Maybe not right now. And maybe, well, he'll be very quiet. I promise. He'll behave.
Yeah.
Right. And this lizard is like whispering in his ear and right, and trying to preserve itself. And then he consents, and he has to consent, which is interesting, but he consents and he says, yes, you can kill it. And he kills it. And do you remember what happens? The lizard is transformed. The man is transformed, and so is the lizard. The lizard is broken, but then he's transformed into a stallion, and the man mounts the stallion, and the stallion carries him up the holy mountain. Right?
That makes sense.
It does make sense, and he's drawing on Dante and a theology which I think is true, which is that those things are us. We are created with our desires.
Right. The
Our
desire
desires
itself is not the problem.
No, it's not. It's good, but they get out of focus. They get warped or focused on something that is not God first, right? And so the desire is part of his human nature, but it has to be submitted. It has to be laid down. We lay down our life so that God can give it back to us. And when he sacrifices or lays down that lizard of lust, it's transformed and raised again as eros, purified love for God.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how do you think beauty in storytelling, whether through poetry, novels, or sacred texts, reflect God's nature?
I believe in the transcendentals. I think that those are helpful ways of thinking about how God's presence and the reality that he's created, how we encounter that. So the transcendentals are beauty, goodness, and truth. Mm-hmm. I've been deeply influenced by an Orthodox writer named Timothy Petitsis, who talks about the beauty first way. And what he means by that is that, and this isn't only an Orthodox idea, there are Catholic theologians who talk about this as well. But the idea that we begin with beauty, that beauty is an invitation into goodness and truth. And so Petitsis quotes Dionysus, Saint Dionysus, the Areopagite, who talks about God creating the world. And the way that God creates the world is that the beauty of the uncreated light, the beauty of Christ, the glory of God shines forth. And it's so beautiful that uncreation repents of its lack of being and rushes towards being in love, out of love for the beauty of the uncreated light of Christ. So
It's a beautiful idea.
I think it's true.
Yeah.
I do. And I think the worldly as well as sacred arts, so poetry and literature, and then the sacred texts. You know, to quote Lewis again out of The Great Divorce, the light is the thing, he says to the artist. You paint so that you can show the light. And I think the role of those texts is to try to point our attention towards and capture something of that uncreated light. And I've had that experience more than once. I think it's familiarity with poetry and beautiful Christian poetry and beautiful Christian storytelling is why the liturgy makes so much sense to me. Because those texts capture that fragments or aspects of that uncreated light, and so I can see it when it's happening in the liturgy too, if that makes sense. Maybe not.
No, it does.
Okay.
And,
did I answer your question, or did I get off on track? Sometimes I do that.
No, I think you did. Like the transcendentals are something that I rely heavily on in as a discernment tool.
Right.
Because I said, I think, who was I talking to? Maybe I was talking to Kimball about how when we were on vacation last month, we came across some like street preachers, and they made our whole family feel very uncomfortable. And then we had to encounter them a couple times. And there was no beauty whatsoever in the words they chose and how they chose to treat people.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's a good indication that something isn't the evangelion.
Yeah.
If it's ugly.
Yeah.
Like you can say, well, I think I've said I've included the right words in the sentence structure or something. It's like, well, yeah, but you've bent it, you've bastardized it, you've broken it, and it's no longer what it was. So, so there's lots of things like that. You know, if we want to know whether the art that we're making, whether it's music or writing or a homily or a poem, is something, I guess, worth sharing or whatever, to put it through that lens of, you know, is this merely provocative or is it beautiful?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's difficult to answer that question, but I think, you know, you put it in front of a few people and they'll tell you. Yeah. And
beauty is interesting. We say, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I don't think that's true, actually.
No,
I think beauty has it really does have an objective reality to it. And part of the way that we know that is because when you put something in front of people, if it's beautiful, they'll see it. They might not know why it's beautiful, but
and I mean, surely people's tastes can be unrefined or refined in the sense that they might not be able to sense it as easily as another person, maybe. Like if you've numbed yourself or blunted your senses with sin, like I'm sure beauty is harder to see, but it's still, that doesn't mean it is purely subjective, made up. It's almost more than that. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder is saying something more than just that it's subjective. So that's the primary thing it's saying. It's almost like, I think when people quote that nowadays anyway, what they mean is to each his own.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, no,
Yeah.
no.
Well, and I
No.
think that that's why Balthasar says, if we any religion that loses beauty will soon also be without goodness and truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Beauty is the shining forth, right, of the reality of goodness and truth.
Absolutely. Are there authors or poets whose work feels like a kind of icon to you?
Yeah. Obviously, C.S. Lewis. I'm kind of a C.S. Lewis nut. It annoys my students, but that's too bad. I'm right and they're wrong.
You are right. You are
I am
right.
right. Well, and
yeah.
actually they do. I think they appreciate it, but it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
really? She's quoting Lewis again.
Do you know anyone else?
Yeah. But I do think like C.S. Lewis has just been instrumental in helping me not only in certain texts that kind of show the reality of this, but also helping us understand what actually the purpose of these things are. And so I really love him for that. You know, I mean, there's quotes I could throw out just based on some of the things that we're talking. So C.S. Lewis, absolutely for sure. And not just Narnia. Narnia is great, but like read The Great Divorce and read some of his poetry. And oh, for Pete's sake, read some of his essays. Like, one of my favorite texts is his sermon, The Weight of Glory. Absolutely phenomenal exploration of the 4th chapter of Second Corinthians. Absolutely beautiful. And like the idea of human beings ultimately as icons of God's glory or potential icons of God's glory. And like, anyway, so yes, C.S. Lewis, and people need to read more of C.S. Lewis than we typically do. There's so much there. Tolkien is another one, although Tolkien, you know, he takes grit to read Tolkien. Not everybody can handle all the description, and that's legitimate. I personally, please don't shoot me, I actually think The Hobbit's about twice as long as it needs to be. That's me. I'm not Tolkien, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, some of the anonymous texts, like The Dream of the Rood, or the author, the medieval author, we don't know who he was, but wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and the Pearl, and you know, so some of that older stuff, can be super formative. Gerald Manley Hopkins, he's I always forget his dates wrong, so I won't try. 19th century, but he's a Jesuit priest and a poet, wrote a beautiful poem called The Grandeur of God. You know, if you want to understand sort of the sacramental imagination and the world as an icon of the presence and reality of God's glory, I mean, that poem, you just read that poem. You know, he wrestled with real depression and maintained his faith in the midst of that. And so he also has writing that helps us to to deal with that in a non sort of, oh, don't worry, God has a plan, you know, your dead child is in heaven, it's fine kind of way. Which is really important, actually, the ability to engage tragedy and suffering, but with the hope of Christ. George Herbert was a devotional poet in England, wrote a beautiful poem called The Windows. Again, all about what it means to be, what it means for a preacher to be an icon of Christ, right? To be lit up by the light of Christ, the way that the stained glass windows are lit up and tell the story of Jesus, not only in the words that there's the words of the story, but also in the life of the preacher and how those two things need to go together. So, yeah, do you want me to keep going, or?
I sense that you could. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Like, and
and Chesterton, obviously. But
yeah.
Anyways.
I don't know, like, it feels to me like this is generally true, at least nowadays, that men tend to read nonfiction and women tend to read fiction. I don't know why that's the case. Like, I'm sure that it's probably somewhat borne out in statistics, but when I do find a good story, And that's, I find, difficult nowadays. Like there's, it might be 1,000 to 1 or something like that, where it's like every book purports to be life-changing, but the Silmarillion,
Right.
for example, would be an example of a book that is difficult to read, but that is, even when you aren't consciously aware of what it is that you're reading, it feels like it's elevating you. Like it's like Tolkien is inviting you into a better world or something. Like a more noble way of living, or there's a sense in which it's kind of like a kingdom of God kind of calling out.
That's part of what he thought fantasy was for.
Yeah.
Right. So have you, in his essay on fairy stories, right?
Okay.
He talks about, fantasy, or writing about fairy, right? And so the kind of work that he's producing, particularly in the Lord of the Rings, and he talks about how one of its functions is recovery, and a recovery of the of nobility, recovery of the nobility.
And Lewis does the same thing here and there, but maybe not as richly as Tolkien does, right? And then I brought a few books down here to reference, but the Loris.
I haven't read it.
So Eugene Vodoloskin is an incredible example of a modern story that does this. Yeah, and so I read a lot of books, but it's interesting how it's just like there's only a handful of them that I would be like, you must read this. If you ask me for a book recommendation, there will be C.S. Lewis in there, there will be Tolkien in there.
Sure.
And in the last few years, this book, Loris, has been in that list.
I'm going to have to try it because, always on the lookout.
It takes you through this guy's story. He's raised as like this peasant healer by, I think, an uncle in Russia, and in the 15th century or thereabouts. And throughout the story, like he does a horrible thing at the beginning of the novel that makes you just think this guy is a worm. But by the end of the novel, he's a saint.
Yeah.
And I mean in a potent way. And it takes you through a whole bunch of miraculous things and a whole bunch of mystical things and a whole lot of pain and suffering. And I couldn't put it down. It's just so rich, so good. Like there's one thing I remember, I think it was Pajot who was talking about it with someone else, and that's where I heard about it. And there's this scene that he talked about that jumps out in my mind. Not to mention the fact that several of the characters walk on water like it's just normal throughout the novel. So I think they call this hyper realism or something, the style, where it's like something, the novel is quite mundane, and then all of a sudden somebody walks across the lake to give you a message.
Right.
It's like, what? But there's this one scene where he is at he's become a monk. He's at a monastery, and the abbot of the monastery, I think, is giving him some instruction and teaching him about God. And they're walking around the outside of the monastery, and somehow, in a very poetic way, he manages to weave in the fact that every time they walk around the monastery, they're like a few inches off the ground, and they're getting a little bit higher off the ground, and they're essentially levitating as they walk around. And so like there's kind of a symbolism happening on like multiple layers, and it's a fun book, and it's also very impactful.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's things in it that happen that you're like, this is so unjust. It makes you so angry.
Yeah.
And then you sort of see this providential purpose for it, 2 chapters later.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of things that come to mind when you're talking. Like when I did I have a master's of writing degree, which I seldom use except to teach other people to do what I don't do anymore, which there's reasons for that. But I remember we took a course from Guy Vanderheg, who's a Canadian novelist, not a Christian novelist, but a good novelist. He wrote historical fiction. And one of the things that he said to us is he said, whatever you write, it better be interesting. Because otherwise your reader's going to get up to get a cheese sandwich and they're never going to come back. And it's
That's
true.
Awesome.
Well, and okay, so maybe that sounds a little bit flippant, but no, really, actually, what you write should be interesting. And I learned this from Lewis, and it was really helpful. I forgot the essay, but he's talking about what Dante's doing in the Divine Comedy. And if you read the Divine Comedy, I mean, if you want an education in how much you don't know, read the Divine Comedy, because he's drawing, not only is he dealing with sort of his circumstances in medieval Italy and what's happening, there, but also the entire philosophy of the Middle Ages / the classical era, and then all of the poets and the artists and Christian theology and the scripture. He's drawing in all of these threads from everywhere and weaving them into this poem, and you're like, oh my goodness, I need to go to school for 500 years to be able to keep up. But at the same time, the poem is accessible to the average person. At the same time, the average person can read that poem and engage with it and take things out of it that are edifying and good, and it's entertaining. And Lewis talks about the way that's actually how our storytelling used to be, where the people who are writing, yes, they're drawing in all of this sort of highfalutin philosophy and theology and science and whatever they're working with, but it was also important that what they were doing was accessible to the common person. And so you're bringing these things together, as opposed to the way, and I critique my own discipline, poetry. Poetry today is predominantly inaccessible, except unless you have a master's of fine arts in writing, or you've spent a whole bunch of time in the English department and you're learning about all of these weird postmodern ways of expressing things while we're not expressing things at the same time, and all of the different forms of poetry that are, for the most part, nonsensical to the average person. And unless you have this background in learning how to read and engage with what's going on, it's not going to make any sense to you at all. And then our storytelling that people do engage with, Hollywood, the popular storytelling, a lot of that isn't necessarily engaging with the philosophy and the theology and the science and sort of that the tradition of higher thinking, if you want to put it that way. And so we have this division, and it's not exclusive. Obviously this doesn't describe every piece of work that's put out, but I think it's a trend. I think it's a general pattern that we experience. And so when you talk about I couldn't put this down, yes, absolutely, a book that is dealing with real themes and theology and symbolism and layers of meaning and all of those things, that should be there. And also, it should be so good you can't put it down, because it's just fun.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying. And I also think, though, for people who are scared to start reading, or they feel like if an author is 50 years old, they aren't going to understand it or whatever, I would encourage people to pick something that's fairly short, that has a lot of praise, lauded on it over time, whether it's
classics are classics.
I got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein here, and my daughter read it and wrote a paper for grade 11, and what she got out of that story, the report she wrote was awesome. It was just I was so proud of her, what she the meaning she extracted from that book, I was like, whoa, I didn't even see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and but my point is that if you take a small book like that and you read it, I guess it's almost similar to the encouragement that people give to first-time Bible readers. It's like, just read. Just read it.
Yeah.
Don't expect to understand it for a while, because you have to get the vocabulary and the syntax of the author kind of in you a little bit. And then eventually you come back to that author and you read another one, and all of a sudden it's like, why, I understand all of this. You know, I don't know exactly what I'm sure somebody could explain what that process is exactly, but that's what I noticed. I remember when I started to read G.K. Chesterton, I just found it utterly nonsensical.
Is fiction or
any of his stuff.
Okay.
I was just like, I don't know what this guy's talking about, but everybody says I should read Orthodoxy, so I'll read it.
all right? Yeah,
You know?
yeah,
And I remember the second time I read it,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I was like, oh, this is easy to understand.
yeah.
So, and I find that often with different eras, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like you're right, like a book should be interesting and stuff, but sometimes it's not in a language style
Sure, that's
that
fair.
is comfortable for you, and
Yeah.
once you crack that through that limiting factor, then you start to see it for what it is.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason why the Iliad and the Odyssey exist still,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So it probably is good, and you might just have to push a little bit until you get it,
Yeah.
until you start to taste it.
You got to get through all those battle scenes in
You know,
Tolkien.
yeah, it's like coffee, you know, or wine or
Yeah.
something. It's like there's a reason
acquired-
why you say that's acquired taste. It's not that it's awful and you're just fooling yourself. It's that you just don't know how to receive it. You don't know how
That's right.
to interpret it yet, right?
Well, and if you spend enough time reading literary texts, this is true more broadly, but you start to realize how in conversation they are with one another. And so in some ways, part of what you're describing is that you become more and more familiar with that conversation. And, you know, it's like, oh, I encountered this somewhere else, this idea somewhere else, or this image or this trope, this metaphor somewhere else being used in a different way. I can see how this, you know, we're playing with these things. Like, you know, a simple example is when I said, you know, the Great Divorce is Dante light for modern people, right? So he's playing with things that have been done before, but he's doing something new and making it accessible in a different way, and so on. And actually, the whole literary tradition is like that.
Yeah, no.
And the more familiar
Art
you
is
become
like
with
that,
it-
because we're not
yes.
creating in ex
Correct.
nihilo or whatever.
And
you know?
the more familiar you become with the artistic conversation, the better able you are to recognize what's happening in this new thing that I'm engaging with and understand what's going
Yes.
on.
There's, I don't know if you remember this, but for whatever reason, this is from Mere Christianity. This is the only thing that consistently is on my mind. There's almost not a day that passes without this coming to my mind, right? Because I have to come up with creative solutions, management solutions all the time to putting out different fires at work.
Interesting.
And but more often it comes out in writing a homily or preparing for this podcast or writing a song or choosing songs for worship. And that is, he talks about how if one, you know, wants to be original, and I'm paraphrasing, but if one wants to be original, you don't go about just trying to be unique, trying to say something new, trying to, you know, create something out of whole cloth, so to speak, but you just tell the truth.
Yeah.
And so if the truth has been expressed or expressed beautifully in the past, then maybe all you need to do to help others break through that ossified beauty that's in an old novel is to tell the same story in a new way,
Yeah.
right? Because it's lasted for a reason.
So
right?
medieval of him.
It's resonating. It's resonating. It's resonating. It's like human nature is not different than it was, 3,000 years ago. Clearly, there are things that are different, like language and whatever, some cultural things, but like what's going on in you is not much different. And so
Margaret Atwood did an interview, it has to be at least 20 years ago. She was talking about The Handmaid's Tale, which is a novel that many Christians don't like. And to be fair, I don't like the new TV adaptation of it, frankly, because I think it misses the point of the novel. But Atwood doesn't agree with me, but I don't care. She's wrong and I'm right. But hey, there it is.
that's awesome.
Anyway,
Hey, it is possible to understand someone's novel better than the author, I think.
well, and part of it is because what she said in this old interview that I'm referencing, I don't even know if I could find it again, but was, this isn't a novel about, like, it's not a critique of religion. It's a critique of totalitarianism. She wrote it after having spent time in Germany, actually, and sort of, right? So anyway, what I was going to say, though, is that one of the questions that she's asked in that interview was, how do we know that human nature hasn't changed? And she said, oh, well, because we have the stories. And she's right.
Yes.
The stories, the old stories.
So are you saying you think she might now believe that human nature has changed?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I don't like her affirmation of the CBC adaptation of her novel because I think they did a bad job. But that's not really the relevant point,
one, isn't it?
The Handmaid's Tale?
No, like that CBC adaptation.
I don't know, 10 years ago or something.
Really?
It was. Yeah.
I remember
was it
watching,
CBC? Maybe it was Netflix.
I remember watching one in the 90s.
Oh, no. That one I think is probably more true to the original text. The new one is, full of things, but
junk. Just junk.
I can be super judgmental. And anyways, I can. That isn't the point. The point of what I wanted to say is I do respect Atwood as a writer. I don't like everything that she does, and I don't.
But we resonate with the old stories.
That's right.
Because we haven't changed as much as we think.
That's right.
Have.
We have the stories because that's what literature does, right? Is it captures the reality of the human experience. That's what it does across time and culture. And so her point was, we know that human nature hasn't changed and the reality of the human experience hasn't changed because we have stories from millennia ago that show us that it's still the same because that's what it
otherwise
was
it would be nonsensical to us, right? Yeah. And you might say, like today we were at the church for a Bible study and we were talking about honor culture, and so. But you might say, well, I don't understand honor culture. And that's nonsense because we still have honor cultures around us. High school could even be thought of as an honor culture on some level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, and there are subcultures, like music subcultures that are honor cultures. And when you're living in poverty, often honor culture is like the only way to distinguish yourself from other people. And so even if you're not in the culture, it's not like those people in that culture have a different nature. It's just that they're orienting themselves around a different philosophy or whatever. Yeah. But the human experience is the human experience. Yeah. So I'm curious whether becoming part of Holy Covenant has resulted from any sort of transformation in this category of attention and worship and so on, in the sense that I'm wondering what kind of trajectory you've had as far as seeing creation iconographically and seeing literature that way and so on. Has it been something that you naturally, you just saw the world this way the whole time, or was that a journey? Like,
I mean, both, maybe. So I think I'm bent that way, to see the world that way. Yeah, it comes naturally to me. I think there are a number of stories, and Lewis included, of writers and authors who come to Christianity because they're reading Christian literature. That's not the only factor in Lewis's conversion story, for example, but it's not a small one, because he recognizes through poems through poets like George Herbert, for example, he recognizes that there is a true articulation of the reality of the human experience in the world, both broadly and in the particular. And so he has to do something with that truth. He can't get away from it. And there's a whole story there.
Yeah.
So, but my point is about that is that same things have happened to me. I've been reading literature my whole life, and it taught me to perceive to look for, attend to, and perceive the reality of the risen Christ in the world. It taught me to see the world iconographically. I spent a number of years working at an evangelical Bible college and had to work through during that time trying to think through, like, what is the argument for why literature matters, because evangelicals don't think literature matters on the whole. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah.
And so trying to think through the reasons for why this is important. And so part of the story that you're asking for is that exploration led me necessarily outside of the evangelical world, beginning with people like Lewis, but also Catholics like Tolkien and Chesterton, and then ultimately into Orthodox thinkers, because they're the ones that actually understand what the arts are for. The evangelicals have forgotten about it. And so that was part of it on kind of an abstract theological level. I also worked in mentorship capacities with a number of young people and found that consistently what was effective was actually teaching them learning to see the pattern and story of Christ in their lives and teaching them how to see that as well. So working with young people taught me to read people iconographically, right? So reading literature taught me to see the world iconographically and look for those things. Working with young people taught me to do that with people. And so when we came to, and I mean, there's deeply personal aspects of this too. When we lost our daughter, we came to Holy Covenant that Good Friday and walked through the Good Friday liturgy, and in that experience encountered deeply the reality of the light of Christ in the midst of that darkness. I forget what stage of the cross it is. I think it's 11, but where the people are asked to read Christ's words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Mm. And in that moment, I just knew, and this is a level of perception and recognition that is far below language. Like, I can talk about it now, but it wasn't linguistic. But he has even that despair, even that, the depth of that darkness, that why have you forsaken me? He's in that too. And so my experience at Holy Covenant kind of increasingly has been, because it's liturgical, because it is openly iconographical, because it has an understanding of Eucharist and the rites that we participate in that say this is real, and we really are in God's throne room. Because of all of those things, everything that was in my story before that sort of leading me to see the world in a certain way, it's like all of that has come home in participation in God's church, at Holy Covenant. And not that I think the Holy Covenant is the only local instantiation of the one Catholic Church, but because all of those things are understood and recognized and practiced intentionally and reflectively and unapologetically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you've expressed that, yeah, beautifully. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And it's these types of things that you just expressed are why I find it confusing when people talk about what they think of as just kind of the trappings of traditional worship as being add-ons or things that we've arbitrarily plugged in to the church or added on or piled on or whatever, because what they actually are is more and more accepting reality as it is instead of as we'd like it to be. What I mean by that is that the creation is iconographic, period, full stop.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, that is very scary. I don't think people realize the implication of the thought that matter is unimportant. Okay, so what I mean by that is when God makes things, he says it is good.
That's right.
And
everything that is good.
right.
Everything that is God's.
Yeah. So who was it? So me and I can't remember if it was, I think it might have been Bishop Gerald. In our conversation, we talked about cremation versus
Right.
sort of traditional burial. And this is the same topic. And what happens when we stop seeing creation iconographically
Yeah.
is things become unreal, cheap.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we start to talk about the body as a shell.
Yeah.
It's not that that idea is like, you go ahead, you have that belief and I'll have my belief. I'll believe that the body is important and you can believe that it's a shell. No, that idea is vile. It's evil.
Yeah.
It's an evil idea. This is why the church fought against Gnosticism as hard as they did, because they realized it's almost like, I think it's C.S. Lewis in Miracles. He talks about, you know, if God were to just kind of grant every wish that passed through our minds, we would be living in this surrealistic, you know, fever dream.
Mm-hmm.
But the world is what the world is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and miracles break in, but they're miraculous because they are not things that we necessarily experience every day, you know. But anyway, the thought there in what C.S. Lewis said that I'm trying to highlight right now is that if the world isn't, if the created world is not iconographic, then it becomes surreal.
Mm-hmm.
And we can justify doing really bad things to each other
Mm-hmm.
and to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so what good literature does is it shows us, no, like, look, you're getting something glorious and wondrous from this little story about, you know, some person who went on a journey or whatever it is, you know, and it's like, that's real.
Yeah.
That's real. What you're getting from that story is real. Oh, and the other thing, when you were talking about being in that evangelical college,
Yeah.
I wonder how much of the problem isn't that we're looking at, obviously you can go to a Christian bookstore, generally an evangelical store, and you can buy all kinds of books.
Mm-hmm.
But they, generally speaking, come in three categories. Okay. So you've got your didactic books that are very pragmatic.
Here's 5 steps to
Here's
a
5
better prayer
steps, and you're going to be a prayer warrior. You know, you can get from A to Z through these simple steps. There's a place for that. Okay. And then there's entertainment, you know, Amish romance or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I got stuff to say about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
And then there's
As a genre.
what we might call evangelical, evangelistic, borderline propaganda, where the objective is to tell a story just so you can get a person to say something like the sinner's
Left
prayer.
behind.
Or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. And so,
How to not write. Anyway.
yeah, but there's no belief that literature can be transformative or salvific in a holistic sense. Okay? That it can transform your mind,
Yeah.
that it can transform the way that you perceive the world,
Yeah.
that it can heal a part of you, just some little part. Maybe it's not, you know, like a revelation, but it's something. Maybe it's helping you to mourn a loss. That ain't nothing,
Not even sort of nothing.
right? But again, it has to do with this looking at the world in a trite way, so that we see things in terms of like binary switches, like a light switch, like I'm either not with God or I'm with God. And maybe if I read the right book, I'll be with God.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we're on a journey, and there are many things about our person that need healing.
Yeah. One of the insights that I came to as a consequence of that time at that evangelical Bible college and wrestling to find a way to articulate persuasively what I intuitively recognized as important and true. Right. So it's like, how do you explain to somebody why ice cream tastes good? Right. It's like, that's hard. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I explain why literature is important in the body of Christ? A lot of time. And there, I have a number of things that I can say in answer to that question. But one of the things that I think is relevant to what you're saying is literature helps us address the problem of goodness. We talk a lot about theodicy, the problem of evil, but we also have, as John Lennox says, a problem of goodness. How do we deal with the fact that there's so much good in the world around us? And literature, one of the things that it does is it helps us to see the reality of the goodness of God's creation. And it trains us to see that. And if it's Christian literature, then it also helps us to perceive that reality as part of the grander story of Christ, as part of the incarnational reality, as part of our identity, right? As human beings made in the image of God. And also this creation, this cosmos around us, which Christ is holding together, reconciling in himself.
Yeah, it points beyond the cosmos.
That's right. And so if it and you know, so we talk about, well, what makes literature Christian? You know, kind of the more it points to that light, the more Christian it is, not propagandistically. Right?
Yeah.
But by embodying the reality of the goodness of God's creation and then helping us to see through that iconographically, the fundamental reason for that goodness is the incarnation of Christ.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it does.
So, Yeah.
And you are correct.
Thank you. I know I am. But that's so why do we end up in a place where we don't appreciate the body? Why do we end up in a place where we don't understand the value of things like non-sacred literature and art and those kinds of things? I think the fundamental problem is a lack of sacramental imagination. So, and actually the fundamental problem is Augustine of Hippo, who I kind of like. I like the Confessions mostly, and they're good.
Where specifically in Augustine are you pointing?
Because Augustine divides matter from spirit. Augustine divides the city of God, right? We have the material church and kingdom, and then we have the real spiritual church and kingdom. And at the same time, we have, frankly, depraved human nature. Like the Calvinists didn't invent it. Right. We have depraved human nature that is fundamentally fallen and cannot lift itself up. And then we have the injection of grace, which is a problem already in terms of just it's different than the Orthodox, right? And understanding grace as an energy of God as opposed to kind of like a hocus pocus. That comes from somewhere, right? Yeah. So we kind of have that dualistic Platonic division between things.
Yeah, that's a Western problem, for sure.
And we end up in a place where the things of the world are fallen. The things of the world are not important. They're going to be left behind when we go to be with God in the spiritual city or the spiritual kingdom. And ultimately, fundamentally, I think it makes sense that would end up in a place where we say, actually, the world is not iconographic. The world is not a place where we read about the reality of the presence of a presence.
Yeah,
of
and I think. I mean, he comes by dualism and semi-Gnostic thinking, honestly, given that he was part of a cult.
The Manichaeism.
Yeah, prior to his belief. And he was aware that they were wrong. Like, he explicitly says they were wrong, but somehow still manages to kind of fall into similar ruts.
He's pushing back against Pelagianism, right? And so the idea that we can kind of through sheer will, right, raise ourselves.
Right.
And there's a whole...
I wonder, I suspect that he would be horrified by the conclusions that we've come to through his writings. And we haven't been necessarily very good at curating his writings and sort of judging what is more important than and better. But
and I don't mean, like I said, I mean Augustine is brilliant and the Confessions are phenomenal and I'm not a professional theologian,
and I don't mean to make you feel bad, but I mean I wouldn't be where I am in my life without St. Augustine. I'm kind of kidding, but it is
St. Augustine was one of those old books that I first read and helped me to start to understand, like what is the role of testimony and confession and storytelling in Christian life.
When I read Confessions, I remember thinking, what the heck? This Catholic guy loved Jesus?
Yeah.
And he was like, he was a couple centuries after the Bible. Like I thought they totally lost track of this information for 1,500 years,
So I grew up nominally Christian in kind of a messed up household and came back into I was converted at 5 by a neighbor. Don't remember it. You actually probably know her older brother, Brent Wagner. Debbie. Yeah. She's my babysitter. But don't remember it at all, but I know it happened. Anyway, and sort of came back into the church by kind of a long wandering in and out road that ultimately was, things came to a crossroads or came to a head. Was a single parent for 5 years and had twins, and they needed me to get my act together. And the church was was a significant part of that. But so I didn't come with that evangelical anti-Catholic baggage. There was just never a thing, never a problem.
Praise God.
Yeah, and my first, so my father-in-law, ironically, was my first spiritual director. And so he was a pastor at the evangelical church that, to be fair to them, they had a mom's group where a single parent could go with twins who was completely overwhelmed and dealing with very difficult things, and they would take my babies and like hold them for an hour, and they taught me how to parent and what that looked like, because I hadn't learned that in my own upbringing. And it was deeply important and formative. And then this pastor, my father-in-law now, his name is Pastor Gary,
Yes.
was
he was a pastor in my hometown.
Yes, he was in Flin Flon, and always a little rogue,
Yeah.
He's like,
Appreciation for the desert fathers? What the heck?
Right?
Anyway.
And spiritual direction, which I think is a profound
Yeah.
ministry. And also, by the way, I think that we should do that at Holy Covenant.
Yeah.
He was my first spiritual director. So
Yeah.
I came back into Christianity, into like a super evangelical the Alliance Church.
Yeah.
And the first thing I kind of walked into was this evangelical pastor who was into the Desert Fathers and into spiritual direction and those kinds of things. And so right from the beginning of my sort of serious walk with Christ, I learned very quickly that in fact there were real and important treasures and gifts in the Catholic Church and in the other traditions. And so it's never been an issue for me at all.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in my experience, and in my sister's experience, interestingly enough, I guess I have 4 other siblings, and 2 of them are half siblings, and the other 2 are now Catholic. And I've gone in this more Orthodox direction, and but it was difficult having that experience of starting to get this deep appreciation for the historic church in the context that we were in, which was much more iconoclastic, semi-fundamentalist mishmash of different theologies, sort of a cherry-picked revivalism. And that said, it's like Jesus, the disciples come to Jesus and they're like, hey, these people are preaching, and they're healing in your name and and he's like, well, if they're, those who aren't, what do you say? Those who are for us aren't against us.
Basically.
Something to that extent. But
yeah.
And I think Paul also has something similar to say. Is it in Corinthians?
Yeah, I think it's in Corinthians where he's
like these people are, maybe they're preaching out of spite or something, but it's like, as long as Jesus is being preached, and so that's what our experience was like growing up, is like, maybe there's some odd things flying around and some limitations, or almost like an unwillingness to see God, iconographically, really, is what it really comes down to. Because there's a sense in which the fact that we can look at any person, no matter how awful that person has become in their thinking and behavior, and see Christ, and see, in some sense, to see the image of God, means that, even the churches who we're not united with, there's always some sense in which we can see Christ in them.
Yeah.
Right? Even if they're preaching something that's utterly heretical, we can see the people, and we can see at least in the sense that like Chesterton talked about, like we could see these virtues kind of thrown around in the world that are maybe disconnected or out of context or out of alignment, but virtues nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's very important because it's kind of a preventative against dehumanization and violence and hateful rhetoric, et cetera,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I promised you I'll take everything in the world back to literature, whether
Awesome.
you would like it or not. It's just kind of like, yeah, I have horses and I beat them terribly.
Yeah.
But, I do think like one of the gifts, the literary gifts, is that when you are reading poets and when you are reading storytellers and things like that, you are they draw you into their worldview from their perspective, and so you learn to empathize, really, like in a good sense. You learn to stand in the shoes of the person who's showing you the world through this particular lens. And the reality of the Christian or the English literary tradition is that it is predominantly Christian, at least up and until the 20th century. That's just true. I mean, the English departments can have their hissy fit over it as much as they like. It's real. And so it is. And so when you're studying English literature, you are studying people who have a deep and resonant faith and a Christian worldview that is embodied in these texts. And so it becomes very difficult, I think, or maybe, you can kind of look at the theological back and forth and sort of the abstract debates over the different points of theology, like if you're thinking about the Reformation or things like that. But then you go and read a poem and the author is Catholic because they're writing in a Catholic time period, and they are talking about and they're asking you to enter into their deep devotion and love for Christ, and how it is His grace and their union with Him that is what offers them salvation. And it's just like, well, obviously not everybody falls into this camp where, as Protestants, for instance, the Catholics are all works and, it's works-based salvation, et cetera. And it's like, I can show you poetry where clearly that is not their devotional experience.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And you're entering into their personal their personal experience of their Christian discipleship.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yes.
So we're about an hour and 13 minutes in, so that we don't make this tedious for people to listen to, especially those who maybe don't have the same level of patience.
For ranting about literature all the time. As they could say,
long form podcasts.
Indeed.
I guess we'll try to wrap it up. So this question, I like, as is often the case, like I write 3 questions or 4 questions. By the time we get to that last question, we've kind of covered it. But is there anything else you can add to this? Do you think beauty in literature can soften the heart to grace?
Yes.
Moving on. No.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of how you think that might be the case?
Lewis says it helps us get past the watchful dragons at the gates of the heart. So he's in that essay, he's talking particularly about what he calls his Sunday school associations. So sort of the do this, don't do that associations that he has with what for him was a fairly negative Sunday school experience. And
don't be a bad boy.
That's right. And had framed the faith in such a way that he found it distasteful. And so, but it was, George MacDonald's fantasy stories and other things that got past those watchful dragons and baptized his imagination, as he says, in Surprised by Joy, even though the rest of him took a little bit longer. And so, yes, I do think literature has the capacity to soften our hearts to God's grace. I think Lewis's story is a really good example of that. I think when we lost our daughter, being able to be to surrender ourselves to the grace and love of God. At least for me, my husband would have to speak out for himself, but for me, I needed to see that, not just hear about it. In the Great Divorce, we run this literature reading group, and I've asked people for feedback, and I've had people tell me about their experiences of reading Dante, for example, and experiencing a journey through the Inferno, a journey through hell, that helped them to understand and realize that just because I'm experiencing hell in my life, it doesn't mean that God has abandoned me. In fact, Jesus goes with me, and there's a way out the other side. And so, sort of discovering that grace through reading this poem, and not being kind of on guard, perhaps, against kind of the we were talking earlier about some of the more like simplistic maybe ways that Christians try to deal with suffering and things like that. It's fine, just go read your Bible, that'll make it better. Those things, when they're not working, when they're not helping, when they feel trite, or when they don't really address what's really going on with the person, I think going on a journey through a poem, or going on a journey through a novel where you can encounter the reality of the presence of Christ and the reality of God's graciousness in the lives of the characters, and consequently in the lives of humanity, and therefore you, because you're part of that.
Right.
It can help you encounter that truth in a way that doesn't feel like you're being told what you have to believe or what you have to do when you're not ready for that.
Yeah. No, this makes sense. Like, even if you think of the, like right now I'm thinking the Gospels specifically, but if you think of the Gospels as literature, which they are, then anyone should be able to see, anyone who's had an experience with Christ knows that, especially when we're ready for it, or when the Spirit softens us, those stories can be life-changing.
Yeah.
My personal story is the story of the woman who is experiencing the hemorrhaging,
Right.
And that particular story, an evangelist coming through town, sharing that story, it broke down my barriers, where I was, I think I was 15 at the time, and I was in this headspace. I was listening to a lot of heavy metal, and I thought of myself as pretty tough. And I remember going to school and making it my mission not to smile.
Interesting.
And I was going to hold it together. I was going to, be a man and not crack and not be weak in the face of the pain that I was experiencing in the home with parents who were always fighting. And so for that preacher to turn to that story and explain that it was a good thing that this woman acted on her desperation and did something that wasn't proper per se, and pressed through the crowd, just trying to touch him, Jesus that is, and then was healed. And that there's this weird aspect where Jesus is like, who touched me? It's like, is this a rhetorical statement, or what exactly is going on here? So there's something about it that's mysterious, poetic, kind of like, what exactly just happened, right?
Yeah.
That story that night just wrecked me, right? And all of that machismo was gone. And what was left was just what I've called a holy desperation. Like, God help me, please, please help me figure this thing out at home, whatever this is, and help me to not just be bitter and whatever, there's all of that was all happening. And so it is absolutely true that through good literature, through good storytelling, those defense mechanisms, like that's what it was defense mechanisms. And I think that's what you were referring to, kind of like
the watchful dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we all have those, and they're trying to keep us safe on some level, but it's not necessarily actually keeping us safe, because those watchful dragons don't necessarily know much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's good. Is there anything that you would like to express, to get on tape before we wrap up?
I guess I think there's maybe two things that we've kind of just haven't said explicitly. One is, one of the ways that it gets past those watchful dragons, or one of the ways that it influences us, is it reshapes those desires. To go back to, we were talking about at the beginning, where like our desires are part of who we are created to be, and we need them to be back reordered. And good Christian literature particularly, but not only actually, can reshape those desires to make us long for what is genuinely good and what is genuinely true. And that's important for motivation and moving in towards God. So that would be the one thing that I would say. And then the other thing that I would just add to that, I think for our young people today in particular, for our young people who are deconstructing their faith, they are not prepared to be told what to think. They need to go on a journey, and they need that journey to be able to deal honestly and sincerely, with integrity, with the problem of goodness in the world and with the problem of evil. And I think for many of them, like I sort of described in broad strokes the story of one person who is in this literature reading group with us, engaging with good stories that can help fill their imaginations with images and possibilities and the experiences of an encounter with God, and to train their theological sensing, their intuition to perceive the good and the true and the beautiful that is, in God's creation and is a reflection of who He is. For those young people who are deconstructing, I think that there's something really important about reintroducing them to this tradition that, at least in the evangelical world, we've lost. Because they're not going to be willing to just do what we tell them to do because we say they have to do it. And they're not willing anymore to accept the desacralized, desacramentalized worldview, that when they see somebody behaving good out in the world, that's not actually good. And when they see those, aspects of God's creation that are genuinely good and true and beautiful, and we say, well, they're not part of the church, so they're not that. They're not having it.
No, you're right. You're right. And I think back to my own deconstruction, and I hate that term.
We should read Death Comes for the Deconstructionist.
Yeah, I hate that. Like, it's just, I guess the benefit is that before I deconstructed, I had read some good literature, and it was also part of what led me there, because I was like, this is not jiving. There's this disjunction between, the person doesn't have the right label on their shirt, so
Right.
Nothing they're doing can be good.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. My eyes doth deceive me, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so you feel like you're in clown world, and so things start to fall apart, and the painful thing though is to know that sometimes when a person's in the throes of that level of cynicism and that level of loss of meaning, the last thing they want is good art. They're just not ready to receive anything nutritious, so to speak.
So give them Inferno, and it'll
Well,
show them what ugliness is.
Well, and I'll say minimally though, if we as people around friends who are going through that grow in an appreciation for literature, eventually that person's going to come out from under their rock and they're going to say, "Hey, what are you reading?
Sure.
What is informing the way that you're the way you're now looking at the world, and how are you not upset and angry like I am, or whatever it is, So like there's a lot of times where in the church people are guilty of recommending things that they're not actually doing
That's right.
themselves. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like, okay, yeah, we can theoretically agree that literature is good and that God can speak to us through literature. Okay. You don't have to become an expert in literature, but find a handful, like myself, a handful of really good books. And like C.S. Lewis says, if they're good books, read them over and over again. And, become an expert in one book. And you'll be really helpful to your friends, I think. That's my theory. Because these books give you so many, it's almost like life experiences that you get for free by reading this book. And then you can go, oh, let me tell you, there's this scene.
We haven't even touched on literature as virtue formation, but yes.
Right? And so I think that if we seek to be unlike those propagandistic Christians who draw lines artificially in reality that aren't real and cause confusion, if we choose to live differently and to accept art and the created world as the legitimate canvas of God that it is, then those friends who are hurting in that way I think they will be attracted to us, and then on down the line, So a good place to start anyways, because it's tricky. Like I can remember what I was going through, and like you say, anybody that told me I needed to read something, I would have been like, awesome, bugger off. Would
you have read it with them?
Maybe. I mean, it depends what it was, right?
Yeah.
Because the problem with deconstruction is because the hermeneutic of suspicion is your primary lens. You're just deconstructing everything. Everything you're consuming, you're tearing it apart, and you're heaping criticism on it.
Yeah.
And that's like this mode that you're stuck in.
Yeah.
But if you can read a good story and put that on pause for even a moment, you're going to go, oh, there's something wrong with my heart.
Yeah. Well, and I do think deconstruction is a fundamentally left hemispheric approach. So we don't have time to go into it, but Ian McGilchrist.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay.
Yeah. The servant...
The master and the emissary, and then the matter of things is then right. And quick story, in the matter of things, in the introduction, it basically says, if you're not smart enough to read all of this book at once, that's okay. Neither are most people. It's kind of great, but I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but anyway, what I mean by that is that deconstruction is fundamentally nihilistic, and it is, and and what it's doing is it is looking at the world and breaking everything down only into its constituent parts, and then trying to manipulate those parts, and it is unable to see those parts in the context of the whole, which, by the way, according to McGilchrist, is basically what it means to be schizophrenic.
Give me a sledgehammer and I'll hit it.
Right, and unable, right? So I look, like a schizophrenic looks at looks at a person and sees them walking down the streets and interprets that as they want to kill me, and so I have to, like if you think about kind of that mental disorder, it's the same thing. You're breaking the world down into its constituent parts, and you're unable to see those parts and how they fit into the whole of God's creation.
It's paranoid too.
It's absolutely paranoid. And so when you read a poem or when you read a story and you set aside that I'm breaking every little thing down into its bits, I'm just gonna read it. I'm just gonna take it in. I'm just gonna enjoy it. And there's no right answer. Like I always tell people, like when you read fairy tales to your children, do not ask them what the moral of the story is. It's not actually the point. Just let them read and maybe ask them what they notice and see what wisdom they come up with out of that experience. So when reading well and helping other people to learn how to read well and engage with literature well is an exercise of trust. You believe that the text can sustain my experience with it and my questions about it without being anxious about it has to tell me something that is true, or it's going to try to propagandize me into something true. Right? And how do I just experience and encounter and then ask questions about what I find there? And when you lead people through a process like that need to kind of break everything down and pull it all apart because I'm suspicious that you're trying to force something on me, it gets past that. It does.
Yeah, for sure.
Does that make sense?
It does. At the risk of getting a much too long answer and running way over time, I have to ask you this question because it's only just now dawned on me. Some, not all, but there are some of my favorite novels are very, very dark.
Right.
And deal with things from an angle which is, falls into a category that's maybe gothic or just is looking at kind of the seedier side of a certain subculture or something. But at the same time, I often find those stories very refreshing or edifying somehow. What's up with that?
Why are they refreshing and edifying?
Yeah. Like I just finished reading a book and it's sitting over there. It's called A Man Came Out of a Door in the Mountain. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but this guy he wanted to write about missing and murdered Indigenous women in BC. That's what he set out to do. So he started with that idea, which easily could have gone into a very propagandistic, political, ideological direction. But instead, he writes something that's more like a myth or a fairy tale, that it blurs between fairy tale and realism.
Okay, yeah.
And reading it, I was like, oh, I feel like I could be in Flin Flon, Manitoba right now. Like, it really, I resonate with the story, the characters, what it's like to live in a small town where you feel almost like no one else on the planet cares less about what your town is going through. And the characters are flawed and are tempted to do things together and get into mischief, and then there's drug dealers in town, and who everybody knows they're the drug dealer, but for some reason the police won't do anything about it, and all of these things. And at the same time, there's this character, the devil, who's the man who comes out of a hole in the mountain, comes out of a door in the mountain, and doesn't have a name, and just goes about causing havoc in people's lives. And there is a main character who's somewhat heroic in a kind of a bumbling way, and and the book doesn't exactly resolve per se. It's not on it doesn't end on a sweet note per se. And yet I couldn't put the book down and just found it very, very refreshing in that it wasn't propagandistic, but it was dark, and it couldn't exactly point the finger at anything except for the devil, which was refreshing as a modern piece of literature, Canadian literature. I was like, what the heck? Like, that's odd. It had this sort of, it pointed the finger at, there is something evil going on in town.
Yeah. So,
but it doesn't have a name,
Right. Well, right. We can't name this thing, right? Isn't that true of our current contemporary cultural experience? We can't actually call evil evil. We don't have a name for evil anymore. We're not allowed to believe that in that anymore.
So what's up with that?
Well, here's my best guess. You're reminding me of my experience reading Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men.
Ooh.
Which is an exploration of the arbitrariness of evil. Evil without a purpose is like the ugliest, it's a horrible story. And full confession, my favorite author is Jane Austen. I like stories that end in marriage and happiness.
Give me the sweet ending.
It takes work for me to read a story like No Country for Old Men. I have a friend who's been trying to get me to read the novel Silence for 5 years. I know I'm supposed to, I should read it, and I don't want to because it's going to hurt. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I have a preference for stories that end on that joyous note. But there was something refreshing about McCarthy's accurate depiction of our experience of evil. It was like it was just calling a spade, naming it for what it is. It was painful to read, but it was also refreshing in the sense that it was true and real, and it helped me understand this dimension of our experience, which is this sort of parasitic purposelessness of this kind of awful thing. And so I think maybe it's something like that. I think we live in a time where we have a very hard time calling a spade a spade. I think we live in a hard time where the word evil is, we shy away from that. And Lord help you if you want to identify something as spiritual evil, right? I think that's demonic. Unless it's in a context that's maybe the, kind of like that kind of propagandistic, superficial, not actually really a great understanding of what evil and the demonic really is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
My husband always tells this story about being at youth group and this these kids standing in the parking lot and praying against the devil because this one young man his car had a flat tire, and so Satan must be trying to keep him away from participating in youth. And Carmen's just like, your tires are bald.
Yawn.
Do you know what I'm talking about? That kind of there's a demon hiding behind.
Cheap. Yeah.
So we kind of have that, or we have
woo.
That. Yeah, woo-woo stuff, or we're not allowed to describe that as evil. What's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. And we have to sort of show that, this harms somebody in a tangible, obvious way before we can even start to talk about evil as genuinely being just evil and wrong. And so,
yeah, I think also maybe what's going on is kind of dawning on me is it helps us to not have sort of a flippant, trite, shallow view of what is happening in the work of salvation. And to admit that there are things happening in the dark that aren't good. And then to understand in contrast to that what God is about in the world. Right? Ultimately what he is trying to shine light on and expose and transform and all of this. It's like, it's one thing to talk about, I really hope that God helps to transform my anxiety about having a wart on my nose or something, and it's another thing to talk about, a small indigenous community in Nunavut where there's and where suicide is endemic or something. And it's like, you can't just talk about something like that as though it's like, hey, keep your chin up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to look this thing in its face.
Right.
And call it what it is.
And it's like, we really are in a battle.
Yeah.
It isn't against flesh and blood, but it is a real battle. And prayer has a purpose, and continue to hold the line, and and to worship has a purpose. Like, you really are a city on the hill and all of that. It's not imaginary or cultural or whatever,
But I think too, like that's why people resonate with Dante's Inferno. Right? The most read book in the comedy. It's 3 books, right?
Yeah.
Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise.
Yeah.
And and Inferno is by far and away the one that is read the most. And because it's calling it like it is, and it's looking at that, and let's unmask this and deal with it. And I do think it has a benefit in the sense that it those things that we kind of brush off, like, oh, that's just happening up in Nunavut. That's not really that big of a deal. It's, the sin that is a reality in the world, and also in the depths of my own heart, we can kind of easily sort of, be trite about that.
Yeah.
And that poem says, no, actually, this is really dark. And we're going to look at how dark it really is. And by the time you get to Inferno, you're so glad when they finally get out. Like, it's seriously, it's like a breath of fresh air. Like, if you actually have that experience, it's really interesting. Yeah. But here's the other thing that I wanted to say about that. The Inferno is the most read book in that series. Next is Purgatory, and very few people go on and read Paradise. And so I think it's good to recognize the value of a book like A Man Came Out of a Door in the Mountain, or Dante's Inferno, or the first couple of chapters of C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, which is situated in Greytown.
Yeah.
But you have to look up. And we don't I
was literally about to say, but look up.
But we don't always do that, because we can kind of get fixated on the darkness and on the cynicism.
Yeah. And I think, like, the fascination of which I am guilty of true crime is just that. Yeah. And it's like, we can lose hope in that. You hear about a lot of people who work in law enforcement who they just they see criminals everywhere. Yeah. Everything becomes dark for them because they're so marinating in it, Yeah,
absolutely. And I, as an artist,
so they should read literature. Police.
It's harder to write a poem about the truth and goodness and beauty of the world than it is to write a poem about its darkness.
Yeah.
It's a greater success to be able to capture without being propagandistic, without the Sunday School Association sort of thing. It is harder to do that well, and I think sometimes it's also harder to have the discipline to go there when we are tastes or our inclinations lead us to the dark things. And so, yes, we
Yeah.
should read literature, and we should especially read the Christian literature that reminds us of the glory of God incarnate.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Like, I remember the first time I experienced the sacrament of confession,
Right.
I left going, wow, sin is two-dimensional and gray.
Yes.
And whatever this is technicolor.
Yeah.
Right? And it's fresh and it's,
real.
yeah, there's so much dimensionality to it. It would take me forever to explain this, you know. And so I think that's what Greytown expresses, is that sin is boring.
Very much. Yes,
it's very
exactly
boring.
that.
It's very boring. And
The banality of evil.
yeah, and we only think that it's interesting because our senses are blunted, right? So I think maybe that's why it's one of the reasons why it's hard, because most of us are just kind of living in the mud.
Yeah.
Like we're just kind of flopping around in our vices or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else to add?
You really want to ask me that, of all people?
You have a one sentence add on? You know what I did with Kimball? I said, can you describe blah, 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 blah in 10 words or less?
I'm so bad at this. This is partly why I don't write anything, because
Yeah.
I can't write anything small. I'll quote C.S. Lewis. There are no ordinary people. There are no ordinary people. Everybody that you encounter has the potential to one day be transfigured into either a god or goddess. That would be so beautiful you would be tempted to fall down and worship them. Or into a horror so bent out of the shape that they were meant to be that you can't even imagine it in your worst nightmares. It is important when we encounter one another in God's creation. The most important thing when we encounter one another in God's creation is to remember to see the person in front of you as an icon of Christ, and to treat them in such a way that whatever you are doing, whatever you're saying, however you're acting, communicates the deep love of Christ for them and for you as a way of helping them and helping you journey towards that intended fully realized human nature.
Yeah. Amen.
I don't know if that was enough.
That's good. No, that's good.
Topic.
That's good. That's good. I'm tempted to respond and I won't. Praise God. Okay. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you very much for sitting down with me and talking, and we'll have to do this again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for giving me a chance to talk about literature.